Hey, folks. Sorry, I'm just a slight bit late. It's about a minute and a half after the top of the hour. And I want to thank you for being here, those of you who are here already. And getting a couple of messages back and forth, but haven't had a chance to read them. So if you shot me a message before this is starting, sorry about that. I'm going to make a little adjustment here and just pull that a little bit closer. So I'm closer to my mic. And all of my studio equipment, my radio mic, my radio soundboard is still all packed away. So I'm working with internal mics and so on. So hopefully it's all right. So Rocky, I just saw your message. Yes, is my answer. So sorry I didn't get a chance to respond prior to clicking in. Hang on a second. Everybody in my house has this right now. So pardon that. I'll cough a little bit through the broadcast tonight. So I just want to say hey to Suze and Casper and Rocky, of course. And yeah, thank you, Rocky, for making sure everybody understood what I was talking about. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And Fran, good to see you here. I'm glad you're liking the book. And we're going to continue tonight with the second half of the chapter from last night because it got pretty long and it got pretty late. And so I don't know if Rocky's going live tonight or not at 11 o'clock. Rocky, maybe you can let him know here. Not sure if you've got a show going. You weren't feeling too well earlier today, as I understand it, or as you said to me. So if you've got a show, Rocky's going to be on at 11 o'clock tonight, I think. So which would be about 2 hours from now. So Joyce, good to see you. Glad you're here. Oh, not tonight. Rocky's not doing tonight. He is down for the count. He's 1, 2, 3, 4. How many fingers am I holding up, Rocky? And his answer is, I'm Batman. So I want to get just some preliminary stuff out of the way as people gather and start coming in and start taking a look, those who come live. And so I want to thank all of you who are live so far. And I know everybody can't make it live, and if you're watching this in a recording, that's just fine. I do it live because it's fun to do live. We broadcast it live. We can make all the scintillating live mistakes that happen when you're doing live radio or live broadcasts. And it's fun to have you here live and interact with me live. So thanks for being here for that. And my throat is awfully dry tonight. So I've got some LaCroix mineral water here to drink that will hopefully help. And I did not make tea. I have not had scotch yet. So maybe that would be the thing to do. Start scotching up before a live broadcast or during a live broadcast. So yes, June, we call it scintillating live radio whenever we have mistakes. And so we've been talking about all this stuff. Oh, and by the way, I want to re-announce what I announced last night. If you didn't catch it last night, just out of the blue, after I've been reading all this, my publisher calls me last night, which is Michael Pye from New Page Books, who published this book, and along with a couple of others of mine. And they've been bought by Red Wheel Weiser over the last year. But they're still working as an imprint of Red Wheel Weiser under the New Page Books name. And so, like when you see like Athenaeum Books and they're an imprint of HarperCollins, that kind of thing, that's what it is. So, or is it Hyperion is imprint of HarperCollins? Can't remember. So he called me yesterday and asked if I would be interested in writing a book on the Book of Enoch. And I said, absolutely, because I'd been talking to him a few months back about doing a follow-up to this book on the Nephilim. And he said, why don't you just take that and wrap that into your follow-up on Nephilim? So I've got to put together a little proposal for them of where I intend to go with the book. And it looks like once I finish the 10 Breaths of Ra, which is my fictional book I'm working on now, once I've got that done and out of the way, I might be just stepping right into writing a book on the Book of Enoch, which we have been talking about. So Hot Toddy is prescribed Jack Daniels lemon honey and a tad of water, says Joyce. Jack Daniels is a little too rednecky for me. I think it would have to be a Glenmorangie 12 to 18-year-old aged in cherrywood casks. So we'll use a little bit of that into our hot toddy with lemon and honey. Also, I got to tell you, folks, when it comes to Scotch, I consider myself a purist or an aficionado. But if it starts with a Glen, Ben, Bal, Dal, Mac, or O, I'm pretty much on board for it. It has to be single malt Highland Scotch. Unless, of course, it's Jameson, which is an Irish blend, which I'll also do when it's in a tight fix. So when I'm slumming it, I'll go down and I'll take a wee dram of the Jameson. All right, folks. So without too much more yakety yak, this chapter that we started is the chapter on the Nephilim. And we were trying to dig in pretty deep. We are at page 191 of the book. And the end of this chapter will take us to, hang on for it, drum roll, please. I believe it's 120. Will take us to, not 120, 205. So we're reading pages 191 through 205. And so about a little over 20 pages. So, no, that's not right. A little under 20 pages, about 15 pages. So that's where we'll be tonight. Joe, Blow, Ricky, aye, laddie. Whatever aye you're saying aye to. Everybody, let's get rolling. We've got a few people in. We'll get a few people more. They'll come and go. And we're averaging a couple of hundred people, 150 to a couple hundred people per viewing of these videos, if memory serves. And so I appreciate it. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. Please hit the little bell icon, and that'll give you notifications when I go live or when I've got a new video. And do like the video down below here. I would appreciate that very much. All right. Last night, we left off on this chapter because it just got too darn long to read in one sitting. And we didn't want to conflict with Rocky's show. And the last section we read of this chapter was, and that's how I met your mother. And talking about the Nephilim were the children of the sons of God and so on. Now, we ended in that chapter. I'll read the last paragraph of where we left off last night. And this is what I do with my kids. When I read them stories at bedtime, I said, we better read the chapter. If we didn't end at a chapter end and ended in the middle of a chapter, we generally always recapped. So once again, we see also in this passage the reassertion of the prohibition against certain forms of sexual activity. As we saw with the serpent character in the Garden of Eden story, we see again in the account of the Watchers. Everything seemed to revolve around encoded sexual activity in its adulterous or fornication forms. And there's always an imposition of the consequential judgment imposed after those rules are violated. In the case of the breeding of the hybrid race of the Nephilim, God, it says, is grieved that he ever made man and set about a great natural catastrophe to wipe them all out, mankind. Mankind and Nephilim and every living creature on the planet, according to the Genesis and Enochian accounts, save for one man and his family and pairs of every known animal in creation that could not survive in an aquatic habitat. So now, that's where we left off last night. And we're going to get rolling now. Jeannie, welcome to the broadcast. Are you not seeing me, folks? According to this, I'm broadcasting. Jeannie asks, is it buffering? Oh, hi. Yeah, you must see me. Okay. I'm not talking about here then. All right, let's move on. The next section in this chapter is perfect in his generations. Why Noah and his immediate family were seemingly the only ones immune from this great watery judgment of God is significant. Genesis 6:9 says, Noah was a just man. According to Judeo-Christian teaching, Noah stood out among the rest of humanity as an example of righteousness and godliness in a world that had gone completely insane with perverse corruption around him. Like Enoch before him, Noah also walked with God. This is where the most commentators and Bible teachers seem to come to a screeching halt, falling far short of, as the late effervescent radio personality Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. There was another reason why Noah was spared, and this reason goes far deeper than the surface issue of merely following God or being a good believer. The greatest cause of frustration over this issue is the fact that it seems to have escaped most commentators either through ignorance of the language of the text or lack of desire to broach these topics beyond the surface message. Genesis 6:9 says that Noah was perfect in his generation. Is the text implying moral and spiritual perfection? Not in the least. Some of its wine. Now this is, by the way, after the flood, after the ark came to rest in the mountains of Urartu, as the scripture says. He goes down. There's nobody around. There's nobody to hang out with. There's nobody to drink with other than maybe his sons and daughters. But it says he proceeded to plant a vineyard. So this is taking a little bit of time now. And when he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered or naked inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it across their shoulders, then they walked in backward and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way, so that they would not see their father naked. It's a respect thing, a cultural respect thing. All right, so here we're talking about Noah being pure in all his generations, not just a good, decent guy. It says right after the flood, he went out and planted a vineyard. Guy could just see him. He's planted this vineyard, and he's like, holy crap, only 6 months, and I'll be able to get some grapes. And when I get those grapes, holy shit, I'm going to be able to stomp them out and make myself some wine. But of course, then you got to ferment it if it's going to get you drunk. It's not just grape juice. So he's got to wait for the stuff to ferment. Who knows how many months or years had passed by. So, but I could just see him. I cannot wait for that first bottle of wine. Oh my God. Especially after, I would think he would have stashed some of that stuff in the ark. You know, it's like, what are you going to do after you watch all of mankind and all of creation perish after 120 days being bottled up in an ark and watching the world destroyed by a great deluge? Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to crack this bottle of wine. So now he's waiting. He's got it coming. The next section in the chapter says, I just survived the great deluge, and now I'm going to Disneyland. What was the first recorded act of Noah in the book of Genesis after the events of the great flood? He got hammered. And who wouldn't? I think that if I just spent if I just spent the last 120 years building a huge barge as a repository for every species of animal in the known world and spent 4 to 6 months in those closed quarters with my wife, my kids, tending to the menagerie, and watching the total and complete destruction of every living thing on earth, the first thing I would most probably do when I had all the puddles had dried up is thank God for my salvation and hit that bottle of 21-year-old single malt Highland Scotch. It's right here in the book, folks. Stashed in my overnight bag. Noah was as predictably human as any one of us. So why does the biblical account call him perfect? What is the meaning of this word? The Hebrew word is tamim, and comes from the primitive root word temen. This means complete, whole, entire, sound, without blemish. Also see Exodus 12:5, 29:1, Leviticus 1:3. In its primary meaning, the word does not refer to any moral or spiritual quality or superiority, but to physical purity. Noah was uncontaminated by the bloodlines of the Watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim. He was also of the line of Abel, the seed of Adam, not of the serpent's bloodline, as carried through the descendants of Cain. Now, I think I may have a typo or a mistake there. I'm not sure. I can't remember off the top of the head if it says in the scripture that he was related to Abel, because we don't know that Abel had any children. But Adam and Eve had a third son to replace Abel, and it was Seth. So I'm thinking that he was the descendant of Seth rather than descendant of Abel. If anybody wants to look that up and put it in the chat room, that's cool. Otherwise, I'll take my word for it that I made a mistake there in the text. Macabre, how you doing, sir? What you say, bro, man? He says, greetings from Osaka. Sterling, good to see you. Let's see. He was the seed of Adam, not of the serpent's bloodline, as carried through the descendants of Cain. Noah alone had preserved the pedigree and kept it pure in spite of prevailing corruption brought about by the fallen angels. That's what I thought at the time. Brought about by the Elohim. What the language is telling us in Genesis chapter 6 is that Noah's bloodline had remained free of genetic contamination, be it angelic or alien or Elohim in nature. Noah was pure human being through and through. Now, by the way, this is what I was called on by some pusillanimous, well-known critic out there who takes to task anybody who is not a certified or an institutionalized PhD or master's degree or letters behind their name, somebody that is promoting work like what I've written here. And I was taken to task, publicly attempted to be taken to task, told that I was a racist because of that last sentence. Noah was pure human being through and through. Meaning I was saying that Noah was of pure human blood. And of course, we talked about this a bit last night. I took him to task equally back and said, you do realize I'm talking about religious mythology, right? About celestial beings impregnating humans and creating a bloodline. You do realize that, right? I asked him. And I didn't really get an answer from that because it went against the agenda he was pushing. Flavius Josephus, a Palestinian. He's not a Palestinian. He was a Hebrew. Palestine did not exist as Palestine 2,000 years ago. It was Canaan. It was Israel. It was Syria. It was the Middle East and all their countries. There was no Palestine. So Flavius Josephus wrote Antiquities of the Jews. And it was the 1st to 2nd centuries after the time of Christ, to educate the Roman Hellenistic world about Judaism and the history of the Jews. In it, he recounts the tale of the Watchers, the Nephilim, and Noah as follows. For many angels of God accompanied with women and begat sons that proved unjust, and despisers of all that was good, on account of the confidence they had in their own strength. For the tradition is that these men did what resembled the acts of those whom all Grecians called giants. But Noah was very uneasy at what they did, and being displeased at their conduct, persuaded them to change their dispositions and their acts for the better. But seeing they did not yield to him, but were slaves to their wicked pleasures, he was afraid they would kill him, all together with his wife and children, and those they had married. So he departed out of that land. That's an interesting variation on the story of the flood. Despite he departed out of that land in a barge floating on waters broken out of the sky. It's just interesting that Josephus, that's where his story leaves off. Despite the rather warmed milk version of events given by Flavius Josephus, the overt implication is then that all other human families on the earth had been contaminated by the blood of the Nephilim, save for Noah and his children. And if the biblical implication is that humanity was completely tainted by the blood of the serpent, as represented in the lines of the Nephilim, it is no wonder that God pronounced such a universal fiat of judgment. As for the falling members of the divine council, who descended to the earth to commit themselves to interbreeding with humans, participating in the abomination, God put them in custody and everlasting chains under darkness, under the judgment of the great day. Jude 6. This is sometimes interpreted as Tartarus, or the nether realms, in 2 Peter 2:4. In Greek mythology, Tartarus is a deep, gloomy place, a pit or an abyss used as a judgment of torment and suffering that resides beneath the underworld. In the Gorgias, Gorgias. I'm not sure if it's a soft G or a hard G. By Plato, he wrote that the souls were judged after death, and those who received punishment were sent to Tartarus. And it is only known in Hellenistic Jewish literature from Greek texts of Enoch 1:20 and verse 2, where the archangel Uriel is the jailer of the 200 watchers who sinned by cohabiting with human women and producing bloodline of the Nephilim. It is further interesting to note that even Peter, St. Peter of the Roman Catholic Church, the big fisherman, the disciple of Jesus, the rock upon which Christ would build his church, the friend and disciple of Jesus, and the apostle who wrote the New Testament books of 1st and 2nd Peter, refers to the Greek mythological place of punishment in the afterlife. He writes in 2 Peter 2:4-10, "For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but sent them to Tartarus, putting them in chains of darkness and gloomy dungeons to be held for judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others, if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless, for their righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. If this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to hold the unrighteous for punishment on the day of judgment. This is especially true of those who follow the corrupt desire of the flesh and despise authority." Now that was Peter, the apostle Peter, the disciple Peter, the same Peter who tried to cut off the ear, or probably tried to cut off the head of one of the temple guards, and the guy ducked and Peter got his ear and lopped it off. The same guy who denied that he knew Jesus the night that Jesus was being tried. The same guy is the guy who wrote that. And he was said to become the first pope of the Catholic Church. It wasn't so structured back then like that. I think they're meaning figuratively. That's who he became. Now, I think it's very interesting here that Peter, this is a rabbit trail, but something that's bothered me for a long time. If you remember, now Peter here mentions Lot by name, that he was a righteous man, and he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that the deeds of the evil cities around him was what corrupted him. And but he was still righteous. But what does he say here? He says, he was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless. Living among them day after day, he was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. Excuse me. Now, if you remember who Lot was the nephew of Abraham. And Lot went to dwell in the cities of the plain, either Sodom or Gomorrah. I'm not sure which city it was. And when judgment was going to be passed on those cities biblically, the angels went to rescue Lot, to get him out, because he was considered righteous, positionally, not experientially, but positionally. And it was interesting that the crowds came knocking on his door because they knew he had these two men in there that they hadn't seen before. And they wanted them brought out so they could have their way with them. And this was supposed to illustrate the depravity of the city. And what does Lot do? He knows they're angels, or is suspecting they're angels. And what does he do? He offers his daughters to the crowd. You know my daughters? Take them. Leave these two guys alone. What the heck? To be somehow metaphysically magical, if I believe them angelic, would I want to protect them by sending my daughters out to a ravenous crowd? I don't think so. What's wrong with this guy? Yet he's called righteous. What that does for me, and it used to, when I was in ministry, nail home for me the fact that any salvation God gives you was something that you couldn't do for yourself. It was something you couldn't earn. It was a gift that was given to you, sustained by the power of God. And because Lot, to me, seemed to be the poster boy for depravity himself, not righteousness. But if he was indeed righteous in God's eyes, positionally, his experience could go up and down while the position remained the same. So, but that was always something that baffled me. And this is, I think, very telling when you look at some of these ancient tales, these ancient apologetics. This is Peter being an apologist for Lot, by the way. You look at that and you can see earmarks all over. It's like they thought people don't think that deep or something. Do you think people of the day went, hey, last year when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, I heard that Lot was going to send his kids out. That's pretty depraved. Do you think they thought that way back then, if it actually happened the way we were told? Or if the story circulated the way we were told it circulated? That to me is problematic. Once again, Moses wrote the stories of Abraham in the book of Genesis. So we don't know how far back those tales actually go. I see there's a little bit of stuff going on here. So if I'm buffering now and then, just somebody in the chat room, let me know if you see a lot of that going on. So far, it seems to be going good on my end. I'm not getting any warning messages. Let's see, Joyce. I'm going to back up here. Joyce said, Mark, by the way, good to have you here. Joyce said, from my studies, Cain and Abel were twins from two different fathers. I would have to dig through my notes, but the word definitions give them the clue. Well, exactly. This is something we covered here. It's what I called the serpent seed theory, if you will, or doctrine. It's one that says that the sin in the Garden of Eden was symbolic and coded language. The eating of the forbidden fruit, the giving it from Eve to Adam, and so on. That it's encoded language. And what you've got there is Eve becomes the mother of twins, which is in accordance to most of your first family myths out there in various religions. The Jewish myth, if you will, the Hebrew myth, was that she gave sons Other cultures, it was twins, it was triplets, it was quadruplets, it was quintuplets even. And so Cain and Abel were twin brothers, Cain being the firstborn of the twins. And yet one twin, Cain, is the son of Nakash, the serpent character in the garden. The other is the son of Adam. And so you've got this twin seed that's going on here. And this is why you see all through the Old Testament, as they're establishing the pure bloodline that the kinsman redeemer, the Messiah, must come from, you always see in the genealogies, they follow the men's family backwards. And it's always the firstborn of every family. They take it all the way back until they get all the way back. They don't go through Cain or Abel. So Abel didn't have any kids, apparently. And Cain, so why didn't they go through Cain, the firstborn son? Well, I think it's because Cain, the firstborn son, was actually Nakash's son. Nakash and Eve. So he was the first of the Nephilim, if you will. Half human, half demigod. So it took the bloodline through the third son, Seth, to get to Adam, which was a break with the tradition. And the reason they did that is because Cain was not of pure human blood. This is why they say Noah was pure in all his generations, all the way back through Seth to Adam, not through Cain, the firstborn, but through Seth, the thirdborn, because the firstborn was not of pure human blood. So there you go. Let's move on here. Let's see. Yeah, fraternal twins, Cain and Abel, different dads. So, let's see, blah, 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 blah. I hope I'm not rebuffering for everybody here. So, heteropaternal super defunction, super fecundation. Super fecundation. I don't even know how to pronounce that word. But yes, that. All right. Now, the punishment that Peter was talking about was reserved for those fallen who had participated in the great seeding of the human bloodline, and would also explain why some fallen angels are kept in custody and others are free to roam the heavens and tormented mankind. There we go. The punishment was reserved for those fallen. I'm sorry, I just read that. Such a severe and dramatic punishment presupposed a severe and dramatic sin. Something infinitely more evil and more sinister than mere mixed marriages. He was nothing less than the fallen, perhaps even demonic realm, attempting to pervert the bloodlines of the human world. By genetic control and the production of hybrids, the serpent of the Garden of Eden and those who left their place on the divine council following him were out to rob God of the people he had made for himself. The serpent character in the Bible, as we examined earlier, was none other than the leader of the fallen. And were the purpose of this book to examine Lucifer, the star of the morning, the glory of God, and a prince of the divine council, a shining one, we would say a lot more about the implications, but we'll save that for another time. Suffice it to say that if the serpent from the garden, who fathered the very first of the Nephilim in Cain, had succeeded in corrupting in entirety the human race, he would have hindered the coming of the perfect Son of God, the promised seed of the man, who would defeat the fallen and restore man's domain. Dominion, that's Genesis 3:15. It is said, or in what is said, is considered to be the very first messianic prophecy in the Bible. God said to the serpent character in the Garden of Eden, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." That is supposed to be considered by rabbinic and Christian scholars alike to be the first messianic prophecy in the Bible. The bloodline of the serpent was manifested in Cain, his offspring conceived during the seduction of Eve in the Garden of Eden. The bloodline of the woman was manifested in her son Abel, whom Eve conceived with Adam. The prophetic implication of this verse in Genesis is that the Messiah would be born through pure human bloodlines, the seed of Adam and Eve, uncorrupted by the blood of the serpent or his host of fallen watchers. That is why you find the lineage of Mary, the wife of Joseph, and the mother to the Immaculate Conception of Jesus Christ in the New Testament, being traced back to King David and all the way back to Adam through the younger son Abel. According to Christian theology, and I do believe that that's with Seth. I have to look that up again. Not Abel, but Seth. I'm not sure that Abel had offspring. If he had, there wouldn't have been the necessity for the third son to be mentioned in all the lineages. So, according to Christian theology, if the bloodlines of the Nephilim had by any means prevented the birth of the only begotten Son of God, they would obviously have averted their own doom. It was for this reason, according to Christian theology, that God drowned all of mankind in the great flood of Noah. Michelle, nice to have you here. Toddler taking a never-ending bath? Yeah, we know what that is. We had little kids taking never-ending going to bedtime tonight. So I wouldn't be surprised if I hear from them again. According to Christian theology, if the bloodlines... Oh, wait, I just read that and drowned all of mankind in the great flood of Noah. There is a state of what I will call contingent dualism at play here. Had the bloodlines of the serpent and the watchers succeeded in contaminating all of humanity, there would have been no immaculately born Son of God, or Messiah, or kinsman redeemer, who the Jewish messianic prophecies referred to as the kinsman redeemer, the seed of the man, the divine savior of our own bloodline, who would take away the sins of the world, because the bloodline of the watchers was eliminated in the flood. The pure human genealogies would be allowed to continue through the pure human sons of Noah, producing a Messiah of pure human blood. But wait, is not the Messiah, according to Christian theology, born of a human bloodline mixed with the bloodline of God? Was not Mary, the mother of Jesus, impregnated by Elohim in the same fashion as the daughters of men were impregnated by the watchers? The Elohim of the divine council? Did not the mother of Jesus conceive the Messiah as a result of a divine sexual interference? And are not the genealogies of Mary, tracing her lineage back to the throne of David the king, and further back to the line of Adam, written in the story of the birth of Jesus, written for the sole purpose of establishing the untainted human bloodline of the Christian Messiah, who was said to be both God and man, both Elohim and human? For indeed, the greatest Son of God was the Messiah himself, born to a virgin, fathered by a God, yet he is called the only begotten Son of God, not simply a Prince of Heaven, but God himself in human form. The mysteries of the universe compound exponentially when the Elohim, who stands in the midst of the Elohim and pronounces judgment on the gods of the divine council, holds the ability to strip the other gods of their divinity, yet strips himself of divinity in order to become a human being in a singular act in the Koine Greek called the kenosis, or the emptying of himself. This, according to Christian theology, placed Jesus Christ in a place far above the gods and angels. God outdid the watchers and the serpent in that he made the perfect melding of human and God, according to Christian theology. Pardon me, but there's a giant in my soup, is the next section. There's some confusion when reading all of these passages as to whether or not these watchers were a caste of hierarchical hierarchical angels, or whether they were lesser gods, as expressly stated in Psalm 82. I believe it is simple as as simple as understanding that the angels of God had different titles in the heavenly domain than they did after their collective descent to the earth. In short, they were perhaps a bit of both. But gaining an understanding that these beings existed far outside the storybookish view many people have of angels is important to understanding the princely majesty of these beings, as well as the devastation that they brought to the bloodline of humanity. Could the term Nephilim, though generally accepted as the offspring of the Watchers, also be used to describe the Watchers themselves? After all, the definition of the word Nephilim means to fall or descend. The children of the Watchers did neither of those things, as they were the progeny of the sons of God, interbreeding with human women. They descended from nowhere, other than the wombs of their earthly mothers. As I alluded to much earlier, a good illustrative example would be the monikers we place on immigrants from foreign countries. As I mentioned once before, when an Irish family emigrates from Ireland to the United States, their children are known as Irish Americans. But then the term extends also to the parents who become citizens. They become Irish Americans. A unique distinguishing factor to the children of the Watchers. They were called giants. And there is some textual evidence to support a larger size. When the wandering Israelites finally reached the Promised Land, an advance party was sent to spy on the country. They came back with this report. So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone, in spying it out, is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. Are also, we saw, the Nephilim, the sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." And that's in Numbers 13. Although I do not fully subscribe to the creationist views of Dr. Henry Morris, I would say I don't subscribe to them much at all. He has some interesting things to say about the giants and their further offspring. He said, "There were giants also after that, in the days of the Canaanites, and these were likewise known as, among other things, the Nephilim. Humanly speaking, they were descended from Anak, and so were also as the Anakim. These people were, of course, known to Moses, and it was probably he who editorially inserted the phrase, 'and also afterward,' and also after that, into Noah's original record here in Genesis 6:4. Moses probably also inserted the information that these were the mighty men of old, the men of renown, men whose exploits of strength and violence had made them famous in song and fable in all nations of the ages, following the flood. To rebellious men of later times, they were revered as great heroes, but in God's sight, they were merely ungodly men of violence and evil." That's Henry Morris. And he was the founder of the early Christian creationist evolutionary theories. So back in the 60s and the 70s, he was very big. During the campaign of the 5 kings in Abraham's day, several tribes nestled around the valley of Siddim in the Dead Sea region, evidently intermingled with the Canaanites, and are considered to be the Nephilim or hybrids of Nephilim. These tribes are identified in both Genesis 14 and Deuteronomy 2 as the Rephaim, or the Titans, children of Rapha, and the Zuzim, or Zamzuzim, terrible ones. The Emim, the Horites, the Anakim, the crushing tyrants. It is the tribe of Anakim that is directly connected with the Nephilim in the report given to Moses and the Hebrews by the spies in Numbers 13:33. The context of the Deuteronomy and Numbers passages suggests that other tribes of giants were relatives of the Anakim, or other lines of Nephilim, particularly the Rephaim, whose descendant is described as living in the city of Gath, along with the Anakim giant Goliath and Lami. The Rephaim are giants and are generally described as being tall or large, and seen to be synonymous with the Nephilim, based on the translation of the word giants in Genesis chapter 6. The tribe of Anakim were descended from a giant named Anak, who was the son or a grandson of a giant named Arba, from which the ancient city of Hebron was originally called Kiriath Arba, or the city of Arba, because Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, in Joshua 14:15. This tribe was so tall that the weak-kneed spies reported, "We are like grasshoppers" to them. The Old Testament scriptures tell of how the tribes of giants were fought and destroyed by the tribe of normal men who replaced them, including the Israelites. Moses killed Og, king of the Rephaim, who lived on the Golan Heights near Mount Hermon, the original spot where the Watchers descended and fathered the Nephilim. Og apparently did not travel far from home. According to the biblical passage, Og had a bed that was 9 cubits long. That's 13.5 to 15.5 feet, depending on which cubit was used, and was called the last of the remnant of the giants. Og may be the source of the word ogre in the English language. It has been speculated. There are linguists who would know a little bit more about that than I did when I wrote that line, and I never double-checked that. I will say that with all honesty. According to Isaac E. Mosenson's The Word, the dictionary that reveals the Hebrew source of English, an ogre is a hideous monster or giant, and is never mentioned. Shan was said to be the last of the original line of Nephilim giants of Scripture. So we are told in Numbers 21:33 and Deuteronomy 3:11. The old etymological notion that the word ogre came from the French language was probably written by men who had never heard of the biblical king Og. The French version explains the RE suffix to be French in origin. The illiterate Greeks, who clumsily borrowed an alphabet from the Semites, probably paganized the stuff of many biblical epics. One of these was the account of the mighty Og and the Anakim, or the Nephilim, battling the armies of God for the rights to settle Canaan. Gigas, Og, is a major figure in their mythic battle between the titans of the gods. As for Og's wife, note the Old Norse term for ogress, Geiger. This is the given source for the Scottish word for an evil spirit or ogre. And that was all from the writings of this dude. I can't remember his name. Where is it? It's just the old French version explains this. I've got it in the footnote. I can look it up if you really want to know. Joshua, Moses' successor, drove the 3 remaining sons of Anak out of Hebron in his first campaign after leading the children of Israel into the promised land. The sons of Anak evidently reoccupied the city of Hebron while Joshua was waging his campaign against Canaanite cities in the north. Caleb later retook Hebron and killed the 3 giants. Supposedly, or surprisingly, there was probably heavy motivation for Caleb to drive them out and keep them from retaking the territory, as this is the region where 40 years earlier, he, Caleb, was one of the spies who said to Moses, "Yeah, they're giants all right, but we can take them. Oh, and by the way, I have this great piece of land already spied out where I want where these 3 giants live." Caleb had his eyes and heart set on a piece of land for 40 years. His motivations to kill the residents were strong indeed, bolstered by sand in his sandals for 4 decades. Now, we had a song in the youth group, "I Want That Mountain," which was referring to what Caleb said. It was just supposed to be an inspiring song. I want that mountain, the mountain that the Lord has given me. So good old Southern Baptist song. David and King Saul fought for a remnant of smaller giants, or fought a remnant of smaller giants who had taken refuge in the Philistine city of Gath. They included Goliath, who was 6 cubits in a span, roughly 9'3", and his brother Lam, whose spear had a shaft like a weaver's rod. The last of the Gittite giants was slain. In still another battle which took place at Gath, which took place at Gath, there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He was also a giant, descending from Rapha. That's 2 Samuel 21, verse 20. The last scriptural reference to the giants, chronologically speaking, may be Isaiah 45:14, which prophesies that Sabaean, men of stature, will become slaves in chains of the redeemed Israelites. In Isaiah 45:14 it says, "This is what the Lord says, the products of Egypt and merchandise of Cush, and those tall Sabaeans, they will come over to you and will be yours. They will trudge behind you, coming over to you in chains. They will bow down before you and plead with you, saying, 'Surely God is with you, and there is no other God.'" These are the characteristics of the remnants of the tribes of giants described in Scripture. Their height was 2 to 3 times the height of normal men. They were associated with some kind of unholy intermixing before the flood. They were closely associated with the wicked Canaanites after the flood. In one case, they are described as having pedodactyl or pedodactyl. I hate it when there's so many consonants together in a word. Polydactyly, extra fingers and toes. What that means. Unlike the Canaanites, there are no examples of Nephilim who become followers of God. Robin, nice to see you. Good evening. The Genesis account clearly states that the Nephilim were on the earth both before and after the Great Flood. This generates another question all on its own. If God sent a devastatingly tragic universal deluge that killed off all human beings and every other living thing for the purpose of wiping out and completely exterminating this hybrid race, why didn't it work? There's a good question. Everybody else died. Why were they still here? Did God, in all his biblical attributes of omniscience and foreknowledge, not know that this act of judgment would not have the desired effect? Did God make a huge blunder? Or was there something more going on? Was the Great Flood not as universal as we were told, allowing for the escape and survival of some of the Nephilim? Perhaps, as ancient alien theorists suggest, the Nephilim bugged out as soon as they knew of the Great Flood's impending arrival. Could the same spacecraft have returned to take away the remnant, only to redeposit them on the earth after the flood waters had receded? That's if you want to go that direction. These are all, pardon the pun, giant questions. As we'll see at the end of this book, there may be some answers that will explain their return and why Moses penned this. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Genesis 6:4. Now, gods. Gods? That's the next subheading in the chapter. We've talked extensively about Elohim, and we know that the word refers to both the singular God and the multitude of gods of the divine council. The context of the passage defining which usage is to be incorporated. Now, by the way, you start seeing in your head this whole issue of the divine council, of demigods. Think back to the mythology that we learned as school kids. About the Olympians, about the Roman gods, about these other gods that existed throughout classical literature. And you see that there were guys like Hercules, demigods. They were children of gods, but not gods in their own right. Wasn't Maui also from, you look at the Moana Disney movie that came out, or Pixar movie, that Maui, that's the first I had heard of him, by the way. I wasn't up on my Polynesian ancient gods, but that he was a demigod. And all I think of when I hear of Maui anymore, even in educated, is you're welcome. So you think of these characters and that we've known about them in classical literature, yet we've never ascribed the same attributes to the biblical characters that were supposed to be children of gods. Wouldn't that have made Jesus of Nazareth, or if he took his stepfather's name, Joseph, Yeshua Bar Yashaf, Joshua the son of Joseph, is what his name would have been legally in Israel, something like that. So if this guy existed the way we think he did, he was, and if he existed the way we were taught, he was a demigod. Characters in a different category as the other religious characters. That is, if you're from within Western religion and civilization. So, Kitten, sorry you're late, but you're here. That's good. You just noticed the giant foot. Oh yeah, oh, yeah. There's my that's my Bigfoot casting back there, and that was given to me by a fellow. That's a cast of a casting of the foot, one of the footprints from the Patterson Gimli famous film. So let's move on here. They were the princes of the divine council. They're also referred to as angels sometimes, as they are seen in the biblical texts in the apocryphal books of Enoch. One such instance of the word Elohim in the plural was I lost my place. I just skipped my eye to a different line. I refer to and it was when King Saul visited the witch at Endor in 1 Samuel 28:13. The noun Elohim is used in conjunction with a plural when the witch tells Saul that she sees gods, or Elohim, coming up out of the earth. This seems to indicate that the term was used to mean something like divine beings among spiritists in ancient Israel. By the way, do you remember, because we've only got about a page and a half left here of this chapter, do you remember the story of Saul? King Saul, not Saul of Tarsus, not the Paul guy, but King Saul, several hundred years earlier. He was the king on the throne when David was anointed to take his place, and David beat Goliath. David became the captain of his bodyguard, and he chased David around for 10 years or something like that in the wilderness. And the night before his fatal battle, he went to see a witch because he wanted to know what was going to happen. And it was at the town of Endor, not the forest moon of Endor, but the town of Endor in Israel. And this woman called up a spirit, and it said she fell back terrified when the spirit of Samuel came up. I don't think she was expecting it. So it's a very interesting story. You might want to look that up. And Samuel told him that the next day he would die and his sons would die. And it's David then who becomes king in his own right, because he'd already been anointed by the prophet Samuel. All right, let me take a drink. Joyce, you say Cain's sister, Nahama, was most probably Noah's wife, who gave birth to Cain via Shem, Noah's nakedness. Maybe. I don't know that off the top of my head. You certainly present whatever facts you have, if you've got any. Otherwise, if that's just something you heard, that's cool. We can all look that up and we can all find out. Just an interesting little anecdote, isn't it? All right. I left off with talking about Endor. Let's see. The noun Elohim, and I said it's divine beings and so on. Elohim is used nearly 3,000 times in the Old Testament for the name of God. And in addition to meaning God, it can also mean gods, goddesses, divine rulers, angels, godlike beings or judges. In the New American Standard Version of the Hebrew Old Testament, the word Elohim is used in these instances for God, 2,326 times, gods, 14 times, divine, 1 time, divine, 1 time, exceedingly, 1 time, God, 45 times, goddess, 2 times, godly, 1 time, gods, small g, 204 times, great, 2 times, judges, 3 times, mighty, 2 times, rulers, 1 time, shrine, 1 time. The shortened singular name for God is the word El, which has the same meaning as above, but in a shorter singular form, God, mighty man, and strength. It is very interesting to note that the sons of God, the angels, and the gods of the divine council had the name El incorporated into many of their names to denote their status as sons of God. Names such as the archangels bore Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel, and even Azazel, or Azazel, as I like to say it, who introduced the art of weaponry and warfare, as well as harlotry and prostitution to the humans. As mentioned earlier when talking about the bright shining gods, various other cultures have beings that have variants of the same word. Sumerian El means brightness or shining. Akkadian Ilu meant radiant, shining one. Babylonian Elu meant the shining one. Old Welsh Elu meant a shining being. Old Irish Elil meant shining or to shine. English elf meant shining being. Anglo-Saxon Aelf meant radiant being. These are all variants of the same word. Philo of Alexandria wrote a commentary of Genesis 6 called Concerning the Giants. In it, he emphasized that the passage was not a myth. And when the angels of God saw the daughter, this is Philo of Alexandria, by the way, 20 BCE to 50 CE, so he was 70 when he died. And when the angels of God saw the daughters of men that they were beautiful, they took unto themselves wives of all of them they chose. Those beings whom other philosophers called demons, Moses usually calls angels. And they are souls hovering in the air. And let no one suppose that what is here stated is a fable, for it is necessarily true that the universe must be filled with living things in all its parts, since every one of its primary and elementary portions contains its appropriate animals, and such as are consistent with its nature. The earth containing terrestrial animals, the sea and the rivers containing aquatic animals, and the fire such as are born in the fire. But it is said that such of these last are found chiefly in Macedonia. It's like say, it's like he's listing, and the animals are on the ground, and the birds are in the air, and the fish are in the sea, and the fire-born animals are found only in Toledo, Ohio. And the heaven containing the stars, for these are also entire souls pervading the universe, being unadulterated and divine, inasmuch as they move in a circle, which is a kind of motion most akin to the mind, for every one of them is the parent mind. It is therefore necessary that the air should also be full of living beings, and these beings are invisible to us, inasmuch as the air itself is not visible to mortal sight. But it does not follow, because our sight is incapable of perceiving the forms of souls, that for that reason there are no souls in the air. But it follows of necessity that they must be comprehended by the mind, in order that like may be contemplated by like. Like may be contemplated by like. And that was the author's emphasis. So there you go. That is chapter 8, folks, the chapter on the Nephilim. And tomorrow is chapter 9 and also afterward. But let's go back through the chat here, because I think there are some of you who may have had some great points to make. Joyce says the Genesis Rabbah Midrash lists Nama. There you go. There it is in religious texts. Let's see. Are we sure it's the same one? The niece, was it, of Noah? Let's see. Just going back through. Joyce, you've had some good comments tonight, some good stuff. Jeannie said some of this stuff is common knowledge in the ancient and moreover the antiquities. Very true. Like I say, when you look at any of this stuff, it's not only important to understand what the language means, but as Janine just said and Joyce was inferring, you have to understand, and we said this last night, that to whom, well, what language was it written in? To whom was it written or directed? Or was it just the author is putting something on a page or on a scroll? Who was he directing it to? What would his audience have understood the context of his words to be? Those are important things to consider when you're looking at ancient texts like this, and especially religious mythologies. Let's see. I'm going to see if there's anything else in here. Peter was the apostle, right? Let's see. Problematic, Jeannie says. I'm just trying to see what some of these things were referenced to. Women were property. That's a general statement. They were property where? Are you speaking about Israel or the ancient Middle East? Because I do know that, yeah, there is a lot of societal moray, if you will, cultural contamination of things written in the Bible, which tells you a great deal about what's being said. If God is writing it and breathing it, is God just going along with the culture of the day? And when he's God breathing certain things or inspiring texts, or would not God rise above that and just say, hey, that's your culture. I'm not talking about cultural. I'm talking about what I'm telling you. That's what I would think would happen. Let's see. I was a toddler. They need their bath time. Very true. Michelle, Jeannie. Every night here, they're talking about kids going to bed, taking baths. There's a giant in my soup. Yes, Mark. Indeed, there is. Let's see. Running on empty. Just read with Scotty. There you go. Slight buffering problems tonight. Sorry about that, folks. I have no control over that. It's not showing up ever on my end. So, Anakin Skywalker. Yeah, I thought about that the first time I saw the word too, but it's an M. So it'd be Anakim as opposed to Anakin. But that's still what comes to mind. Let's see. Robin, yes, glad that you're here. Glad you made it. Cordia, Jane, Stewart. Great name. Great sounding name. Truly enjoying your study. Thank you, Scotty. Refreshing. Refresher. Your time is good. Hi, Caleb. I see you. I hear your song, son. Thank you. We will meet soon, son. I know this in heart. Not sure what you're referring to there, but I'll accept it as it says. Rocky Stucci always wanted to be one of the gods chosen. Or is he just a demigod? We'll find out. Hi, just noticed the giant foot. Yes, we talked about that. Kitten's here late. That's okay. There we go. We have 6, 5, 7, FT members in our family giants. She said that. You have 6, 5, 7, 7-foot members in our family giants. I'll tell you, it's nothing against you, Suze. Nothing personal. I hate abbreviated words, even on the internet. I rarely do it because I like to write in full sentences. I like to write in full words. And so sometimes, you'll have to forgive me, I struggle with the abbreviations because I'm not quite sure. We always learned when you abbreviate, you put a period after the word. But that's old school. That shows you how old I am. It's like the word often. We were taught when I went to grade school in the 1960s, late 1960s to the early 1970s. We were taught that the word often, that the T was silent. So it's the word often. And that it was very highbrow to say the word often with the T pronounced. So unless I slip because I've heard somebody else say it. I say it the way I learned it. I say it often, and I'm stubborn as hell about it. Let's see. She said it. I'm a midget, though. All good, Scotty. I get lazy. I know better. Yeah, you know. Who cares? We're all mental midgets in one sense or another. And we're all giants in one sense or another. Oh, man, does that fit into tonight's theme? So, yeah, I don't care, really, Suze. I'm just belly aching about it because it was something to talk about. That's really my handicap, by the way. So Toledo, Ohio, yes, Jane, Toledo, Ohio. Let's see. Oh, you're a midget too. Okay, well, there you go. So I've got a room full of midgets. It sounds like the beginning of a joke. So there was this guy reading a book on the Nephilim giants, and a bunch of midgets entered the room. What's the punchline for that one? So there you go. You know, I have to say, personally, I've known some dwarves, but I've never known a midget. So if you're being literal. And Rocky? Yeah, Rocky's a midget, all right. Yeah. 6'9", with fire shooting out of his eye and thunderbolts from his arse. You all know what that's a reference to. So, okay, that's pretty much it. I don't see many other comments other than for me to say I appreciate that you've all been here. Now we're through Chapter 8. We have Chapter 9. It's entitled, as I said, And Also Afterward. Let me let you know. Chapter 9 in the book runs from 207 to 216. Actually, 215. So it's a relatively short chapter for tomorrow night. Then we have Chapter 10, Where Are They Now? And that runs from 217 all the way down through, let's see where it goes, 217, all the way up to the conclusion, which we'd read with 217. So you're really looking at 217 to 233. 17. There's roughly 27 to 30 more pages of the book. And we're going to finish it up in 2 nights. Tomorrow night and then Friday night. Today's Wednesday, right? Yes. So tomorrow night. Now, I don't know how tomorrow night's going to work for timing. We may skip the reading tomorrow night, Thursday night, because I do the Consequential Rapscallions with Jeff Dougherty. And we generally start at 9 o'clock Central Standard Time and run an hour to an hour and 15 minutes thereabout. So she said it. It's Thursday there. So what are you in Australia? Again, I can't remember. I think you mentioned once before where you are, but you're a day ahead of us. So let's see. Perfect time for your book and us giggles, Cordia. It's good, thank you. Love and favor to you and yours. Look at all those abbreviations. But thank you. Thank you for that, Cordia. I appreciate it. So tomorrow night, Rapscallions, the Consequential Rapscallions, I do declare, with Jeffrey Dougherty, starting at 9 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern, And let's see, Australian time, that would probably be something like noon tomorrow. Noon the next day or something like that. I don't know for sure. She said it. It's 1:16 p.m. there tomorrow. So we're speaking to the future when you speak to She Said It. So there you go. Mark, thank you. It's been a pleasure tonight. I appreciate your being here. Tomorrow again, chapter 9, and also afterward it's called. And then we'll take it from there. A couple more nights. Oh, wait, tomorrow night we won't be doing the reading. See, I forget. Be the next night. Friday night and Saturday night should be the last 2 readings of the book. And tomorrow night, Rapscallions, Consequential Rapscallions with Jeffrey Dougherty at the same time as these readings. So once again, thank you for being here. I appreciate your presence. Like the broadcast if you would. And also subscribe if you're not subscribed. Click on the little bell. Because when we're done with this book, I'm going to start doing regular commentary, regular things, regular videos on my YouTube channel. And we'll give it a little break, and then we'll move into the next book, the Secret History of the Reptilians, which can be a little more, it's a little more wordy, a little more nitpicky on things sometimes, because I started trying to decipher the reptilians and ended up asking the questions about why we need such things in our mythology on a psychological level. So, and we dig it deep into the history, the Sumerian history of Enki, and all the things that happened that build this reference to the reptilians. So there it is. That'll be coming up sometime in the near future. We'll have other broadcasts in between. So thank you again for the 5th time for being here tonight. And you have a wonderful night. I will see you tomorrow night on Jeffrey Dougherty's channel with the Consequential Rapscallions. And then we'll finish up this book Friday night and Saturday night. Thanks again. Share it and enjoy it. Hope you're having a good time. See you later. Have a good night.